of all names. What a privilege to be with you again. We're in the book of Genesis, chapter 40. Got a few more verses to finish up in this chapter. The story is Joseph. Joseph has our attention, has had for a while. He's in prison now. His master's wife tried to get him to lay with her, and he refused to do so. She grabbed his, finally, after several attempts, and Joseph never would yield to that temptation. She grabbed his cloak, held on to it while Joseph ran away. Anyway, when Potiphar came in, she accused Joseph of trying to lay with her, and she refused and grabbed his coat, and just a big lie. But anyway, Potiphar had to do something about it, and so he puts Joseph in prison. When he gets in prison, the keeper of the prison finds favor with Joseph. He turns things over to Joseph. And after a while, there's a couple of fellers in there with him. One of them is the baker of the Pharaoh. Another one is his cupbearer. Anyway, they both have dreams, and this kind of stirs them up because they're concerned what it's all about. And Joseph lets them know that God is an interpreter of dreams. He can tell you what it is. Anyway, the chief butler comes to him first, tells him about his dream. He has a vine with 3 branches. The clusters of the branches produce ripe grapes. He has seen himself getting Pharaoh's cup again, giving him his wine, or serving him. Anyway, Joseph says to him that the interpretation is in 3 days, you're going to be restored to your position. You're going to deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, and after the former manner when you were his butler. And then in verse 14, we begin here today, chapter 40 of Genesis. Joseph says, "But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house." So Joseph, he's so confident in his interpretation of the dream that he asks the butler to not forget it and remember him. And even after he is restored or released and restored, he asks to inform the Potiphar, or rather, well, actually Pharaoh, that what has happened. And Joseph goes on to say, "For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon." So the report is, and the feelings are, as one commentator put it, let no circumstances ever attempt the child of God to doubt and question the watchful care and kindness of their Heavenly Father's providence. Let them bear in remembrance that he not only works in his own way, but chooses his own time. And let them rest in the assurance that both his way and his time are always the best. Though he tarry, then wait for it. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. Well, in verse 16, let me read down a few verses here. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 baskets on my head. And the uppermost basket, in the uppermost basket, there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. My. So in 3 days, the things that Joseph declared, interpreting their dreams, would happen. And it did come to pass just as he said it would happen. The butler is blessed and thankful for what Joseph had shared with him, but he didn't carry out the request, the plea of Joseph in telling Pharaoh about what had happened to him. And the chief baker, well, he probably wished that Joseph had been wrong concerning his dream, because it did come to pass. In verse 20, we read the rest of the verses. It came to pass on the 3rd day. It came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to him. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forget him. So Joseph was still in prison. Let me close the chapter by quoting from Spurgeon. Spurgeon wrote, "Sad would it have been for Joseph had he put his trust in man. But though the butler forgot him, his God did not. The Lord was reserving Joseph for a more timely deliverance. He was to come out of prison to a throne, and that was best secured by his waiting a little longer. It is good for a man to hope and quietly wait for the salvation of God." So it would be quite a while before Joseph would at last be delivered from prison. But we can only wonder, I can only wonder, what went through the minds of Joseph when those 2 men, the butler and the baker, as they were set free, just like Joseph had interpreted and prophesied that they would be. And yet he waits and he waits and he waits some more, and he gets no word. He's still there. He's still there. I can imagine frustration. I can imagine disappointment. I can imagine questions. I can imagine why that ran through Joseph's mind as he is still in prison. But in chapter 41 and verse 1, it tells us, "And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river." Now, I wonder, again, what would be my reaction if I were left to sit in a prison for 2 years when I thought maybe I would get out much sooner. What kind of spirit? I wonder, what kind of spirit would I manifest? Would I be bitter? Would I retain my sanity after that long of a period of time? Well, Joseph was indeed a unique person, a unique man. He had already endured a lot of hardships, so he's going through some more, and it's going to be 2 more years before he gets out. And so here, 2 years roll by, and Joseph, he's still there in prison, waiting, if you will, for the right time to come. And if the vision tarries, wait for it. If what you feel that you're going to receive and hadn't done it yet, wait for it. Faithful. There's something about being faithful. They that wait upon the Lord, as it says in our Bible, shall renew their strength. In verse 2, behold, there came up out of the river, Pharaoh's had a dream, as he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. The dream, in fact, Pharaoh has 2 of them. Adam Clark suggests and states as to what the kine probably were. This must certainly refer to the hippopotamus or river horse, as the circumstances of coming up out of the river and feeding in the field characterize that animal alone. The hippopotamus is the well-known inhabitant of the Nile, and frequently by night comes out of the river to feed in the fields or in the sedge by the riverside. On the other hand, Strong's, the noted Strong's comment or interpretation, if you will, he says that the word Paul, which is mentioned here for kine, means a heifer, a cow, heifer, kine. This, of course, would not contradict what Clark said about what the kine were as heifer or cow. That would apply to any female animal, quite frankly. So what kind of animal? I don't know. Pharaoh knew, of course, but it doesn't matter in a sense, because the prophecy involves what happens to those kine. Now, Yahweh, in his eternal mercy and providence, he caused Pharaoh to dream a dream himself. In fact, 2 dreams. The dreams that they troubled him greatly. And he spoke to those around him, his wise men, about the dreams. In verses 5 and 6, he slept and dreamed the 2nd time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So the dream involved both animals of Egypt as well as food supplies of Egypt. Verse 8 then says, and it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. And then we get to the interesting part. Verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. So finally, after 2 years, finally, the butler remembered what he should have done 2 years earlier. Or should he have? Again, we're questioning here, as it were, the work and the will of God. So let me not question whether he should have or should not. God makes no mistakes, and he knows when things should happen in the lives of his children, you and with me. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put him in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both he and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. Verses 12, 13, and 14. There was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man, according to his dream, he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent, verse 14, and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. I wonder, here I am wondering again, but I wonder If Joseph had let his beard grow through those 2 years that he was kept in prison, wrongfully condemned for something he didn't do. And now, whether that's the case or not, whenever you come before the king, you need to prepare yourself. Might need to take a bath, brush your teeth, comb your hair. You don't want to come before the king without first shaving and without first taking a bath. You don't need to come with rumpled clothes that hadn't been cleaned in 2 years. We should present our best when we come before the king. In verse 15, Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Well, obviously there must have been an introduction that took place before Pharaoh started telling Joseph about his dreams. He must have been introduced to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh introduced to Joseph. But on the other hand, Pharaoh is possibly so shaken by his dreams and what it could possibly mean. He can't figure it out, and his magicians can't. He's anxious. He is anxious to hear what this young man will tell him. Verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me, O God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So Joseph, like all whom the Lord has blessed, claims no special power himself in interpreting dreams. He gives God the glory, as we should as well, for such things. Joseph, he assures of Pharaoh that God will give him the answer to his dreams. Joseph was unique indeed. Then let me read on several other verses. In verse 17 beginning, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph in my dream, Behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind sprang up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And then verse 25, Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed the Pharaoh what he is about to do. So Joseph, he saw in the interpretation, as Pharaoh was telling them the dreams, there was no request, as Daniel made with the king, to give him time to pray and to think about it. Joseph, he begins to tell the Pharaoh what the dream means from the get-go. Beginning with verse 26 again, let me read a few verses. The 7 good kine are 7 years. The 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that, the verse 32 finally, for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. My. Well, anyway, when the dreams are told Joseph, then he tells Pharaoh what they mean. Both dreams are speaking of the same thing about what's going to come upon the land of Egypt. 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. That's going to cover the land. Now, the reason for this dream being shown to Pharaoh twice was to show him that it was established by God and will shortly come to pass. It was not just something he ate before he went to bed. This is from God. Now, quite frankly, it amazes me that we have such examples in the Bible, that we read such things as we read here, such as Nebuchadnezzar and now Pharaoh. They were shown dreams from Yahweh that would not only affect them and their country, but would also have a tremendous effect on their world. You know, even Nebuchadnezzar was called my servant, my servant. So that's interesting that God, Yahweh, dealt with the heathen kings and leaders of the different nations, as well as dealing with his people, his kings and prophets. So it is interesting that I wonder if leaders today would only have a spiritual awareness. I know the leaders today, mostly in the world, are anything but God-fearing. In verse 33, Joseph says, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Now, to me, it sounds like Joseph is bold. After all, Pharaoh's asked him, he's told Pharaoh, so he's bold to not only interpret the dream, but tell him what he needs to do. Some strong and good advice. John Gill writes, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, of good judgment and conduct, of abilities equal to the execution of a scheme hereafter proposed. It can scarcely be thought consistent with the great modesty of Joseph that he meant himself, or that indeed he ventured to give any advice at all, until it was first asked of him by the king. Well, it sounds like from what we read, Joseph didn't give the king time to ask, what am I going to do? What are your suggestions, Joseph? You've told me what the dreams mean. You've given me the interpretations, but what do I do? Well, he didn't do it. Of course, Joseph voluntarily told him what he needs to do. And anyway, verse 34 says, let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint officers over the land, take up the fifth part of the land in the 7 plenteous years. So Joseph, he not only tells Pharaoh, and imagine this, this Pharaoh is the big chief, and he has the authority to put Joseph right back in prison. But he's boldly here because he feels God has anointed him, of course, and he is the one that had given him this interpretation of these dreams. So he is freely to recommend to Pharaoh what you need to do is to appoint some officers all over the land and gather the corn in. And in verse 36, and that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. So Joseph, he not only told Pharaoh the interpretation of his dreams, but he also advises him what to do, to find a good man. And again, I don't think, I'm not of the impression that Joseph was thinking of himself. He's probably glad to be out of prison and hope he can stay out. But he tells him to find a good man that he can put in charge of the food production during these 7 years of plenty, store them in big harvest silos or someplace, because the 7 years of famine is going to come right after that 7 years of plenty. In verse 37, the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh, notice verse 38, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a man as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? My mind. Now, so it seems, according to Mr. Gill, if we search among all the ranks and degrees of men throughout the kingdom, let them be of what character they will, we shall never find a man like this, who appears to have the Spirit of God, or of the gods. As in Pharaoh, of course, was a pagan, and possibly interpreted or stated it like that. In verse 39 and 40, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. My, that's awesome. To give Joseph such recognition. Now, I know it's been 2 years, well, it's been more than 2 years, of course, that since Joseph was put in prison. But we have no way of knowing for sure whether Pharaoh even knew about Joseph. I don't know if his chief captain Potiphar ever informed Pharaoh about Joseph. And he was taking care of Potiphar's house, his business. So I would have my doubts that he made any mention to Pharaoh about Joseph, but maybe he did. But anyway, regardless, Pharaoh said, for as much as God has showed thee all this, there's none so discreet and wise as thou art. In verse 40, thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. This is awesome. What Joseph said to Pharaoh not only pleased him, made him feel good, but it also made him realize that there's no one that could feel such a responsible position as the man that was standing before him, who had just interpreted those 2 dreams. So one day in prison for something he had not done, the next day standing before Pharaoh, and then made second in command of all Egypt. My. Now, I say one day in prison, I'm just speaking about it, speaking about the fact that Joseph one day wanders around in the prison. I don't know what he's doing now. He's still in charge of the prisoners, probably. He goes to bed that night and sleeps through the night. And then, lo and behold, the next day he's summoned to go meet Pharaoh. So it's a very interesting, shocking experience for Joseph. God does wonders in his own way. He works things out that we don't understand. If we have the patience and believe that God is is God, and that he will fulfill his plan, his promises to his children. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So let's live today faithfully. Let's work today and live today as if this was our last day, because it could be. Tomorrow, we could be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, or tomorrow, we could be called home by death. Let's be ready. Let's be ready. God bless. God bless you, Sister Jacqueline, Brother Michael, and the church at Dewa, and all that you are accomplishing for the kingdom.
Thank you very much, Bishop. God bless you too.
Thank you.
Amen.